Hey, welcome back to Soul Detox. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be going into a new series called Fear Factors. And we're going to basically figure out how to conquer the fears and anxieties we live with on a daily basis. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rajiv Khatri. I was born and raised in the US as a Hindu. And I had a very powerful encounter with God where he began to reveal himself to me and communicate to me through visions. As a result of that, I've got this passion and desire to share all that I've learned, all that I experienced with all of you. And every week we hold these Soul Detox talks. And all of my teachings are based on the life, person, and teachings of Jesus. But irrespective of what faith background you belong to, all of my teachings are going to be practical and relevant for all of you. Whether you come from a Hindu background or a Muslim background or a Christian background, if you're Buddhist or atheist, it doesn't matter what faith background you come from. All of my teachings will be practical and relevant for all of you. Now, how many of you have actually heard of or watched the TV show Fear Factor? Okay, there's some of you. Great. I'm going to show a quick clip for you.
Where all hell breaks loose. Get on the side of the pool, it's all over, right?
So I know for some of you, this video had a little bit of shock value, okay? You know, and really the concept of the show is where these contestants compete with one another, which brings about a person's fears. And that's really what we're diving into over the next few weeks. And granted, you know, some of the different fears and stunts that these guys would go through, you know, eating bugs and cockroaches and you know, flying from helicopters and jumping from one building to another, it would invoke all these different fears that people have. And sometimes it would get really disgusting, but overall it was a very entertaining show. Now, last week, I got into an interesting conversation with a few people after our talk. And we realized that he, as well as my wife and I, were living in Washington, D.C. at relatively the same time period. And this was during the September 11th attacks, or also known as the 9/11 attacks. Now, both Sarah and I were in college at the time, and I was living with my parents. And I remember very vividly, you know, coming downstairs that morning, you know, getting my breakfast, pouring myself a bowl of cereal, sitting down, you know, start eating, and I turn on the TV, and the news is buzzing and going crazy because American Airlines Flight 11 had just crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers in New York City. I'm looking at this in shock. I'm like, what the heck is going on right now? And about 10 to 15 minutes later, a second plane hits one of the other towers. Suddenly, I see these buildings just collapse, fall to the ground, killing hundreds and thousands of people. Instantly, I decided I need to call Sarah. I call Sarah up and, you know, wondering if she's heard what's going on, if she's heard about this, if she's seeing the news of what I'm seeing right now. Now, at the time, she was at GW, George Washington University, which is in Washington, D.C. So I'm calling her up, and she doesn't answer. So I assume, okay, well, she's probably in some boring political science lecture right now. But for me, in my mind, all these thoughts start to occur about what could the people in New York City be going through right now? What sort of fears and worries and anxieties are entering into the minds of the people in New York City right now? But then it hit home. Because moments later, the news reported that a third plane had hit and crashed into the Pentagon at DC. Instantly, I became extremely filled with worry, extremely filled with fear and anxieties. I pick up the phone, I start calling Sarah again, you know, trying to figure out, you know, if she's okay, where is she? I start calling, no answer. I call again, no answer. I call again and again and again, and still no answer. And then I couldn't even call anymore because I kept getting this recording saying, I'm sorry, all circuits are busy right now. Please try your call again later. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Do you not know what's happening in our country right now? I've got to try again later. I can't get a hold of my wife. What is going on? I started to become so scared, not knowing if Sarah was okay or not. In a matter of an hour, terrorists had hit New York City and our nation's capital. I didn't know what was going to happen next. Fear of the unknown began to fill every part of my being. Now, fortunately, Sarah did come home safe and sound, and she started to tell us what was happening in DC. She started to talk to us about how, all the cars were just parked on the street sporadically, and people were just huddled around the cars listening to the radio to understand what was going on in our country. Fear became the emotion of our nation. The entire country was gripped with fear. For weeks, for the next few weeks after that, everyone was glued to the TV, watching the news, watching video footage and imagery, recapping, rehashing the events of what transpired that day. We would see people jumping out of buildings in hopes that they would survive. We would see bodies being dragged from under the rubble of the buildings. So many fears were circulating across our country. Fears of our safety as individuals and as a nation. What if terrorists attack again? What if the economy crashes? What if I lose my job? What if this is the beginning of the end of the world or the start of World War III? All these what ifs, what if, all these what ifs filled our everyday conversations. But then one of the fears ended up manifesting and became a reality. The economy did start to crash. And my father, who had a high-level job at a tech company that provided solutions for the U.S. government, well, they lost their funding. They had to downsize. My father lost his job. Certain fears that we were all concerned about, that we were all worried about, started to become a reality for us. So many fears and worries and anxieties filled our family. You see, we all have something, or many somethings, that we're afraid of. We have something that we're afraid of that in reality is beyond our control. And we may hear one thing that just sets it off. And the next thing we know, we're spiraling down this dark tunnel of fear. We're spiraling down a series of what ifs. What if I lose my money? What if my business fails? What if so-and-so reject me? What if I don't find that perfect job or that purpose for my life? What if I get sick or get cancer or something? What if something bad happens to my family? What if? We fear losing control of things. And when that happens, we don't have peace in our lives. We don't have peace in our hearts. We're constantly fearing the what ifs. The truth of the matter is, many of you here at this very moment may be living with what God describes as an anxious heart. There's a heaviness about you. There's something that's weighing you down. It's making it difficult for you to cope. It's making it difficult for you to do the things that God wants you to do. And for some of you, there's something that is significantly bothering you, something that you're worried about. And God tells us that anxiety weighs down the heart. And there's some of you right now at this moment, you are weighed down with a heaviness of a certain concern in your life. Many of these fears that we go through really are the result of us losing control. And the reason many of us fear losing control is because control is something we never actually had in the first place. We live under this illusion that if we do everything just right, we do everything just perfectly right, that everything will turn out exactly the way we planned it. That the events would be exactly the way we want them to be. And the real irony is, the real ironic thing is, that the things that are oftentimes the most important to us, the things that are most precious to us, are oftentimes the very things most out of our control. That's why so many people have actually learned to live with an anxious heart and don't even realize that the anxiety is weighing their life down. But God tells us that He hasn't given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power and love and of sound mind. In fact, a historical scholar named Paul, he wrote it this way. He said, "For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God." So you haven't received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. What Paul is pointing out here is actually so profound. God created all of us. Therefore, He loves all of us. He cares for our well-being. He has our best in mind. Why? When we choose to follow God and obey God, he adopts us as his children. And if God adopts us as his children and he's our heavenly Father, then it only makes sense. It only makes sense that he doesn't want us to worry. He doesn't want us to have a spirit of fear. He doesn't want us to live with an anxious heart. It only makes sense. Now, there may be some of you who may be thinking, well, I'm not really fearful. I don't fear anything. I don't really worry or deal with that at all. I don't have anxious thoughts. And hey, you know what? If you're one of those people, I would encourage you to really take some time and to reflect and ask yourself, am I in denial? Am I lying to myself? Because I don't think I've met a single person who hasn't dealt with fear or worry or any sort of anxiety in their life. But then there are others of you who may be wondering, okay, well, how do I know? I mean, how do I know if I'm living with an anxious heart? How do I know if I'm living with a spirit of fear inside me? For you, so glad you asked. Now, I'm going to go through 6 diagnostic questions that can help you discover if you're living with an anxious heart. And as I say each one, basically in your mind, just picture check boxes in your mind, a yes or a no. And as I share each diagnostic question, in your mind, check off yes or no to each question. First, are you easily rattled? You're a person who becomes rattled when things don't go as expected. Second, do you often worry about things that are beyond your control? Now, some of you may be thinking, yep, that's me. If that's the case, check off the yes. Next question, do you lose sleep over pressing issues? Now, with this, you've got to really be honest, guys. You got to be honest with this one. Do you lay awake at night worrying over things? Do you have sleepless nights? Do you become stressed and anxious? And some of you may be thinking, sleep? Oh man, I don't even know what that is anymore. I haven't slept in months. If that's the case with you, again, check off the yes. The fourth question, is it difficult or hard to turn off your mind? Maybe your mind is always playing games or maybe negotiating different scenarios, different situations, role-playing various situations, which sometimes can be helpful when it comes to problem solving. But if you're not able to turn it off, or if this is something that occurs a lot with you, then check the yes box. Fifth question, does the unknown intimidate you? Does it bother you not knowing what's going to happen? And then the last question, do you often imagine the worst case scenario? Do you assume that the bad thing is what's going to happen? Do you imagine from a pessimistic perspective? Now, as a rule of thumb for me, if you check yes to 3 or more of those boxes, chances are you're living with what God describes as an anxious heart. You're living with this and it's weighing down your life. Want to know where I stood with this? With some of these? Well, I used to get easily rattled with a lot of different scenarios and situations, especially with things that were beyond my control, which would then cause me to get into this place where, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how things are going to happen. I start imagining the worst case scenario. I start losing sleep at night. It just, I get so anxious and, well, wait a minute. Oh crap, I think I covered all 6. Well, at least I'm speaking from experience. And that's okay. I mean, this was especially true for me during the turmoil of the 9/11 attacks and when my father lost his job. My entire family struggled, and they all would have answered yes. If they were answering honestly, they would have all checked off the yes box in these questions. But how do we handle this? If we're not just becoming fearful and filled with worry and anxiety, but these fears are actually manifesting, they're becoming a reality, how do we handle this? If Jesus was such a profound teacher, how does he tell us what to do? How does he tell us to handle these things? How do we have peace, experiencing God's peace in the middle of all these fears and anxieties? Now, I see that he taught us 2 principles, or 2 steps to this. First, he says, make up your mind not to worry beforehand. Jesus said, make up your mind not to worry beforehand. Because in reality, worry doesn't actually change anything. He even took it a step further. He said, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? In other words, what good is worrying going to do? What good does it do to focus on the negative versus the positive? Now, I'm reminded of a story of a world skiing champion named Kim Rickelman. He was an extreme skier. Now, do you guys know what extreme skiing is? Okay, let me explain it a little bit. Now, keep in mind, I love skiing. You know, I'm an avid skier. You know, I would do all kinds of crazy things on the slopes. But extreme skiing is, even that's crazy for me. What these guys would do, these skiers would go to the top of the mountain, and they would ski down as fast as they possibly could, with the goal that they would reach the bottom without hitting a tree and dying. That was their goal. Their goal is to reach the bottom as fast as they could without hitting a tree and dying. And there are many skiers who have actually died this way, where they've actually run full speed into a tree. Now, Kim was one of those few people who didn't die. And in an interview, he was asked, Kim, how is it that you don't run into trees? And his response was this, and it was a really interesting response. His response was, how do I not run into trees? Well, I don't look at the trees. I look at the spaces in between the trees. Think about that for a moment. That's actually so simple, yet so enlightening. I don't look at that which distracts me or would get me. In other words, I don't look at the what ifs of fear. I've made up my mind beforehand not to worry or not to focus on the what ifs. If you don't want to be fearful or worry or have an anxious heart, you need to make up your mind beforehand not to worry. Take your mind off of the what ifs of fear. What if the economy goes bad? What if he or she is unfaithful to me? What if the doctor gives me a bad report? What if our children don't turn out well? This is a spiritual discipline that Jesus is teaching us. Make up your mind beforehand not to worry. Even before the situation arises, make up your mind not to worry. Well, that's easier said than done. Just make up your mind not to worry. Is that really what I came here to learn? Is that really what I came here to listen to? Now, just bear with me for a moment, because here's part two. We figured out the why. The why is we want to conquer our fear and anxiety. The what is to make up your mind beforehand. But how do you do it? How do you make up your mind beforehand? Now, before I really dive deep into this, I want to help unpack a reality. There are two aspects to the spiritual world, the spiritual realm. There's the good, holy God aspect of the spiritual world. Then there's that evil side or satanic side, or as Darth Vader would say it, the dark side. Okay, so there's this good God holy side, and then there's this evil side, and you may hear me refer to it sometimes as the enemy side. And the enemy uses fear as a tool to deter us from God's best. The enemy uses fear as a tool to deter us from God's best. Let me try to explain it another way. How many of you have actually seen the movie The Wizard of Oz? Okay, pretty much everyone here has seen Wizard of Oz. Do you guys remember the character that didn't have a brain? It was the Scarecrow, right? And he would sing this song, if I only had a brain. Yeah, I know, I'm trying to, become a triple threat with the singing and all. I'll try to stop with that. But let's think about that for a moment. What does a farmer do when he's got good corn, good crops, and birds keep sweeping in and grabbing and eating all of the good corn? What does a farmer do? Puts out a scarecrow. He puts out a scarecrow. Now, does the scarecrow actually have the ability to harm any of the birds? No. What does it have? It just has a weapon of fear. Now, the spiritual enemy also uses the weapon of fear against us. Now, I like to think about this. If I was a bird, I like to think of myself a smart bird, like a bird with a high IQ, maybe an Einstein sort of bird. If I was a bird and I started flying around and I saw a scarecrow, I would know that scarecrow has no ability to harm me. And all it is just a weapon of fear against me. In fact, what I would actually start doing is I'd start looking for the scarecrows. Do you know why? Because that's where the good corn is. You see where I'm headed here? You see, really what the scarecrow is doing is the scarecrow is an advertisement for the good corn. And when you realize this, you start to realize that the wall of fear is oftentimes an advertisement for God's blessings. The wall of fear is often an advertisement for God's blessing. When fear enters your life, when fear enters my life, if we allow our faith in God to break through that wall of fear, to break through the other side of fear, oftentimes on the other side of that wall, we'll find God's blessings for us. When you direct your focus off the fear, you begin to see God's best for you. When the enemy tries to remind you of the fear, you need to shift your focus to seeing God, the good things that God has in store for you. Even when you can't see it right now, even when it may be cloudy and it's hard to really see, you can trust in the fact that God's best for you is yet to come. It's there waiting for you. If you say, I fear rejection, I fear getting hurt, faith of God in me breaks through that wall of fear, and I'm able to find the intimacy that God desires for me. I fear failure. Faith in God helps me break through that wall of fear, and I find the blessings of success that God has for me. The wall of fear is often an advertisement for God's very best for you. Going back to my story during 9/11, while it was one of the most fearful times in my life, it was also a catalyst for some of the greatest blessings in my life. And the two big things that came out of the situation was, one, my desire to launch my own company. It was birthed out of that because I saw what happened with my family, with my father losing his job, the uncertainty that was happening across the country. I saw my friends struggling to find a job. So I decided I want to carve out my own path. And it enabled me to feel empowered and pushed and motivated to start my own company. But the greater breakthrough, the greater blessing that came from this was the fact that it was actually the beginning of my spiritual journey. You see, during this time, during the 9/11 attacks and during all this chaos, my father-in-law felt compelled to sit down with me and pray that I would experience God in a profound way. When he prayed for me, from my perspective, from my side, I felt like nothing actually happened, so I discounted it. But what I didn't realize is that moment actually planted seeds inside me that actually grew years later. After my dad lost his job and after he went through his own period of the fears and the anxieties and the worries, after he got past all that, he eventually got a job offer which brought him to Charlotte, North Carolina. And this opened my eyes to Charlotte. And at the time, Sarah and I were married and had our first child. And we went and visited Charlotte. And we actually decided, let's move our family there as well. So we moved there. And it was in Charlotte that God began to speak to me in these dramatic ways, where he began to speak to me through visions and hearing his voice in a variety of ways. It's through that process that ultimately brought all of us here to India, which has been the greatest blessing for our entire family. But I still believe that God has our best in store. The best for us is still yet to come. When I live this way and I look at God's best every day, I experience God's best daily. The way I do this is by having a relationship with God. Every day I'm learning new things about God. I'm learning new things about his character, who he is, how he functions, how he operates, how he views the world, how he sees things. I'm able to grow in my love for him. Every day I'm finding more and more purpose and direction that gives me meaning and hope. Every day I talk to God, and the crazy thing, the mind-blowing thing, is that God talks back. He speaks back. He communicates. There's dialogue that's occurring. I'm learning new things about myself and other people. I'm learning new truths about God. I'm learning new things about his plans and blessings for my life, for the purpose and plan he has for me. You see, although 9/11 brought about a wall of fear in my heart, God's blessings, God's best, was on the other side of that wall, just waiting for me. A historical figure, Charles Spurgeon, he was a renowned speaker from the 1800s. He said this, he said, "Anxiety doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrows, but it only empties today of its strength." There will always be situations that occur in our lives that the spiritual enemy will try to use against us to fill us with that fear and anxiety and worries in our hearts, to weigh us down in our lives. But the next time you're facing a fear or a worry or an anxiety, make up your mind beforehand not to worry about it. Make up your mind beforehand by holding on to the fact that the wall of fear is oftentimes an advertisement for God's blessings. The wall of fear is often an advertisement for God's very best for you. When you have faith of God in you and allow Him to help you break through that wall of fear and experience God's blessings, imagine how transformation your life will become. Suddenly you're walking your daily lives without being fearful, without being filled with worries and anxieties. You're walking out your daily life with the confidence that comes from God, the strength that comes from God, knowing that He does have His absolute best for you. You know, we all struggle with fears and worries and anxieties in our lives at different points of our lives. Imagine if we could embrace the reality that the wall of fear is oftentimes an advertisement for God's blessings, often an advertisement for God's very best for you. Imagine if we could be freed from the bondage of fear and anxiety. Imagine if we're no longer a slave to fear. And that through this reality, realizing that the wall of fear is an advertisement for God's blessings for you, that we could live out the purpose that God's calling us for.